Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a week of the Better Events podcast. In this episode, we are talking about all things registration, mastering event registration, tips and tricks from the queen of registration herself, Leanne Velky. In this episode, we are kind of deep diving into registration forms and websites specifically, so that part of registration. And there are so many tips and tricks in this episode. You're going to want to stick around. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson. And this week we have a very special guest. I feel like all our guests are special, Mary, but this one I'm particularly excited about because we are going to be diving into the behind the scenes of event registration and specifically setting up your event registration website, process, all of the things that happen to help people buy tickets, register for your event before they even arrive on site. And that's just something I'm thrilled to learn about. So, Mary, I'll turn it over to you to introduce this week's guest.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Leanne, who is the owner and chief queen of registration at Leanne Velky Inc., an agency she's been running over the past 10 years, focused solely on building complex registration sites for mostly corporate clients. She'll soon be launching the Reg Vault, a community for those passionate about registration to come and learn and connect with each other, which is amazing. We're so excited for that journey, and we're so excited that you're joining us here. So thank you for being here. And is there anything that you'd like to add to your intro?
No, thank you so much for having me. I am beyond excited to be here. Very honored to be a part of this beautiful community. So thank you for having me. And the intro, I think, is a good coverage of all the things.
Yes, and we always like to start with our listeners of letting them know why we invited you on. And I will say for Event Reg, this was a requested topic that we've touched on the basics, and we'll link to those past episodes in the show notes. But we wanted to have someone who could really deep dive into it, because Mary and I have done a little bit of Reg, but I will say when we put a little call out on our networks on LinkedIn, overwhelmingly your name was dropped. And so I feel like we were like, all right, we have to get her on the phone. And we had a little pre-call, and you were a wealth of knowledge. So we could not wait to have you on the podcast. And after, we always like to start very, very broad. So if you could just how do you define event registration, or what we're referring to sometimes as Reg for short?
Yes. I think it's interesting because registration actually does encompass so much and can mean so many things. So in my world, it is all of kind of the gathering of attendee data and communicating with attendees and creating that registration form that they're seeing. Basically, all that stuff that happens before on-site registration is happening, which is a whole separate meaning of the word of registration, right? So it's all of sort of the tech and logistics of getting attendee information before we're actually on site.
I'm loving that we're talking about this because I already am like have a million questions, but it will come, everyone. It will come. One more high level question for you, because we have to ask this. What is the story behind your title, Queen of Registration? It's amazing.
Yes, that is basically actually got called out by my friend Dalia Elgazar, where she called me higher. She said, it's great that you have a ton of CVent knowledge, but you need to elevate your thinking and your expertise and your reach to really kind of expand to all of registration and not just CVent specific. So it's actually been a personal call to elevate my own thinking and be bigger and better, to be honest with you about that story.
Well, and it's also very memorable. I think the branding is great. Queen of Reg, just like Mary said, it's it just helps you stick in people's minds.
That's how you get 15 people to comment on a call on LinkedIn to when someone needs something about registration.
Yeah, you're doing something right with the amount of people that threw you out there. So why, you know the answer to this, but just for our listeners, why is a solid event registration setup so crucial for a successful event?
I mean, registration is the crux of our event. This is something I feel so incredibly passionate about. And I really just wish more people would give registration the love, attention, care, all the things that it deserves, because we are pretty much nothing without registration for our events. We need to know who is coming. We need to know how we can cater to them. We need to know our number so we can report it to sponsors, so we can report it to our higher ups. Like, so much hinges on registration, and it just like doesn't get the love it deserves, considering how much stuff we actually pull out of registration, you know? So I would argue it's the most critical part of your event. Others would probably argue with me on that, but it really is, it all hinges on it, in my opinion.
I mean, yeah, because if you think about it, can your event happen if people aren't signing up? Maybe depending on the kind of event, but like really, that's where you get all your information that you need. So how else are you going to know who your attendees are? I think that's a fair statement for sure.
We now need to jump in to tell you about the Better Events Conference. Yes, we are hosting the Better Events Conference for our third year in a row this year, and we are hosting a virtual day on October 1st and an in-person day on December 18th. We have different ticket types available if you're only able to join us virtually on the 1st, or if you would like to join us both days on the 1st and the 18th here in Seattle. Here is a couple more details about our conference.
On Wednesday, October 1st, this is the virtual day, we'll be ditching the PowerPoint and lectures as much as possible and instead focusing on conversation starters, interactive workshops, group consulting, and more. Some of these will be recording. Some of these you have to be virtually in the room to experiencing them. On Thursday, December 18th, this is our in-person workshop day. This is where we feature interactive workshops and small group work. You will leave with things like a new system, a new goal, or a new perspective on your event career. We will be gathering, like we said before, at a secret location in downtown Seattle. So it's going to be really fun. More to come on that.
Now you might be saying, Logan and Mary, how do I buy a ticket? So go to bettereventspod.com/conference in the show notes if you want to learn more. We will also put the direct registration link on SwapCard. Tickets range anywhere from $55 to $169. $55, that lower price point, is going to be for the virtual day only on October 1st and access on that day only. So you need to be there live, get all your information, and then you don't get access to the platform afterward. All the way up to $169, which is going to be our highest price point for the all access ticket. That means you're coming to our virtual day, October 1st. You get access to replays. You can rewatch things, keep downloading content all over the months, and then come to our in-person day here in Seattle, December 18th. And without further ado, let's get back to the episode.
So as we're getting more into kind of what this process looks like, what are the must-have elements for a seamless event registration website?
Okay, so the website part of it, not the actual like form part of it, because those are actually two different things.
Let's start there. Tell us the difference between the two.
Okay, so a lot of platforms give you the ability to have an informational website, right? Where you can host all sorts of information about your event. And that's sort of like the sales page. That's where we're putting all of the details about what's included, what to expect, who might be there, the agenda, the pricing, all that stuff, so that we can get information to our attendees. And then there's the form part where we're actually having them, fill in their information and tell us they're coming, right? So two separate things, and we don't always use the website, right? Sometimes people put the information on their own hosted website. And then we're like embedding the registration form onto the site or somewhere else. But yeah, that's two different things.
So specifically the form, because I feel like this is more in your wheelhouse. What are some of the must-have elements you see in a good event registration form?
So for me, a good registration form is a balance between efficiency and getting answers that we need from our people. And so I know this is like a weirdly controversial topic, and probably skipping ahead in some questions that maybe are already ruminating for you guys, but there's a big debate about how many questions is correct in reg and all that. And my personal stance on this is it's a balance between getting your registrants in and out as fast as possible, because obviously no one wants to be filling out a registration form for 20 minutes. We all unanimously agree on that. But there are things that we actually need for ourselves to make us better at planning our event and more prepared for what we're going to deliver on site, what our stakeholders need, what our sponsors need, and what the attendee needs, right? So there is a balance there. And so I always say permission granted to ask the question if you actually need the answer to that question. I will never be pro, boil registration down as much as you possibly can, or boil it down to nothing, basically, and just worry about the rest later. Because really, ultimately, a lot of the reason why we use reg tools and why we use the tech is to make our lives as planners easier and better. And we can't forget that in the mix and in the push to just boil reg down to like first, last email and then quote unquote worry about the rest later. If you need the answers to the question, you have my permission to ask the question.
I think that's a great sentiment for sure. Some of the things that consistently I've seen, so we'll get involved in an event and then we'll go, sometimes they've already launched registration. And so we go back and look at it and we're like, there's a couple things that we probably would suggest that you add. One of those things is like meal choices, depending on what the kind of event is. Sometimes that just doesn't get asked, or any dietary restrictions. Maybe you could do that in the meantime if you don't know what the meals are going to be. But I just can't tell you how many times we've had to backtrack because that hasn't been part of the registration process. And then the other one, which I think is really important right now, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on this as well, Leanne, is having something where people can put in any like accessibility needs that they have or anything like that. So we've kind of helped some organizations with some like wording on how to put that in there. But sometimes depending on the registration platform, there's not like even room for a lot of custom questions. And so getting creative on, I'm sure you know how to make that work. But along that line, are there any other specific items like that you feel you provided good context on? If you feel like you need it, then you need it. But is there anything else that's just like maybe kind of obvious that you should for sure have on your form?
That's so funny because like dietary is so obvious to me because I literally ask it on every single reg form that I didn't even think about throwing that in. So thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, we have worked in a lot of like the ADA questions a lot recently and the meal choice questions. Other things that are required, I think like standard reg fields are generally, name, email. I like to include most of the time like a CC or an admin email field so that, I work a lot in corporate. So a lot of times the admin is registering for their person. And so I just add them as like a CC email address field so they'll get copies of their person's email. Company phone number is iffy sometimes, job title, like those are things that we can then use for data purposes, right? And like grouping people, meal choice or dietary restrictions for sure. Sometimes, a fair amount of times, there's some sort of consent question as well, right? Around registration consent, but also like on-site consent and code of conduct. And those can be easy check boxes. I don't know if there is a sort of standard form necessarily that we always have to get. Those are ones that come up most of the time. And then the rest of what kind of goes around that is more either meeting or client or company specific, if we're adding more beyond those kind of basic reg fields.
I feel like a lot of our listeners can probably relate to the like wishing that they like forgetting a crucial question that then creates more, to your point of a well done reg form saves us all time. Because I was going to say my version of that was an event I worked that then they got a book that they wanted to mail to everybody, but they forgot to have mailing address, like physical mailing address, as part of the form. And so it got added halfway in, and then your 80 people are getting emails that you're trying to manually collect their mailing addresses and put it in their profiles and all this stuff so that it could be automated on the other end. But it was a lot of work that like just a simple question.
I mean, that's true, right? So I think there is a lot of, we do need to be more strategic in the way that we're looking at it. And really, it's funny how I'm always like the very last person to get involved in the meeting. And I get so many requests from clients that are, it's always like, oh, reg needs to go live next week or yesterday, right? And it's always this kind of very rushed process, which is why I'm always advocating for like giving it the love and attention it needs, because to exactly your point, Logan, like it's crucial that we know what we're doing with that data and the purpose of what we're asking, but also kind of understanding like what are the rest of the components of the event. And I think we talked about this before, but the thing I always forget about is badges. And I always kind of forget to think through the badging part. But my story to go along with both of yours is there's a fair number of times where we're in badge creation and it's like, oh, we need a way to identify VIPs or someone with a food allergy or something along those lines. A lot of times I happen to build those things into reg, but sometimes we don't. And then we have to kind of get creative with how we incorporate that into badges. So even having an idea about badges, or to your point about we're going to be mailing a booklet. If I love, one of the things that I kind of have put into a talk that I've recently started doing is my number one first tip is always be listening. So in planning meetings, my brain is always kind of listening for stuff like, oh, how's the booklet design coming along? And my brain's like, what booklet design? And what are we doing with that booklet, right? So the example I always use is the same question of how are the t-shirts looking? And then I'm like, oh, do we need to be asking for sizing for people from registration? So obviously not so great if reg has already launched, but those are things like I'm just kind of, it's really helpful to have your registration person in those meetings, or to have your registration hat on in planning meetings, and always be thinking about like how those things are going to pull through or how they could be incorporated into registration.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot in there, and I love it. And I feel like our listeners have like definitely just put your registration hat on, and which I think is easier said than done, because we've all been there. Yes, here's 3 people, and all of us have had an instance where reg is launched without crucial information involved. But kind of in those lines, Leanne, what are some common mistakes that you see event hosts and planners make these days when it comes to whether it's their registration form or their overall just flow?
So I think that is a bit, I do want to just touch really quickly on the importance also of like taking notes while you're going through registration so you can do better next time, right? And we are always learning, and it's never going to be perfect. It's every single registration process I've ever launched, which is a lot at this point. There's always something in there that we're like, oh, we forgot to ask that, or let's do it differently next time. So I think that it's just as important to kind of keep notes and circle back on this stuff, so that we can always do better next time, right? But I think that is the biggest thing is actually not reflecting on what happened last year, how it went last year, and trying to make active changes this year and doing better on the next on the next go around. The biggest thing obviously is leaving stuff off or asking too many questions. I will give a little bit of credit to the people who say we're asking too many questions in Reg. I think that it's just really important to sit down and really be strategic about the things that we're asking so that we aren't overwhelming people or asking questions just to ask. A lot of times there are a lot of questions sort of thrown in there for seemingly no reason. And the way that I kind of teach around that is just educate your people on why you need that information. So if you have to ask that question and it's maybe a little bit weird or awkward or worded strange, or it seems like it's not important, just tell them what you're going to do with that data and why you are asking that question. So I think lack of communication also is probably a big kind of part where we fall down a little bit sometimes.
Thank you. That's super helpful, honestly. So many tips, everything you've said. It's like tip. So thank you. Lots of
You're
tips.
welcome.
We're going to shift gears a little bit. We'd love your feedback on our 2025 Better Events Conference, which is our event that we have coming up in the fall and at the end of the year. We have a registration form. So we'd love to kind of do a little audit with you, which
Okay.
I am going to pass over to Logan.
So yeah, so here's our reg form ourselves. We're using SwapCard for our website and our host platform for the whole both virtual and in-person day. We've used it the last 2 years. It's our third year. And I will admit why we chose it, honestly, because built-in was easier. So we have, this is not the reg website that we talked about earlier. We have that, like, lives on our podcast website, but this is when you're clicking like, yes, I want to buy tickets now. This is our very, very simple flow. We'll be honest.
Okay. Fair.
So yeah, so it's just got your 3 ticket types. If you click on one, and we have definitely went simple. I guess part of our strategy this year, we did get feedback that we asked too many questions. And so we tried to really, for lack of a better term, dumb it down of just how many questions. So we just have email, first name, last name, job title, company, level of experience, and our terms and conditions.
Okay, this is very simple. We just talked about dietary, right? So
Yep.
Obviously one question would be around how you would plan to handle that. My pushback always on a really simple reg is, how is this going to affect you as a planner? And are you going to be able to get enough information out of this as a planner for you to do an excellent job for yourself, right? So that's sort of what I would look at. Obviously, it's clean, it's simple, it's straight and to the point, and people can obviously register really quickly. A little bit of what we talked about before, and I have this conversation a lot with people, is just to remember that you're never going to get 100% participation after registration. So if there's something as a planner you think you would really need from people, now would be the time to ask it, right? Because if you're going to have them come back, you're probably going to get, I don't know, my guesstimate, I don't have data or science or things to back it up. My gut guesstimate is maybe 60% that will come back and answer more questions for you. So as long as those follow-up questions are things you don't really need answers to, then I think that's okay. It's not a long reg form, so I can't critique it because it looks nice and clean and it's really pretty. So my question is just more always around like the strategy and making sure you're getting what you need out of it.
I think you brought up a really good point, because I was thinking through, like, it's interesting when you plan your own event because you get to sit in the seat of like a lot of our clients or the other events we work on. And in my mind, Logan, I don't know about you, I'm like, yeah, we don't have a couple of those things on there because we're still figuring out what the event will look like. But usually, many times, you have to launch registration before you have all the details. But to your point, Leanne, I like what you were saying about trying to think proactively enough to think what might you need, and then just like cover your base by asking at the beginning.
Yeah, which I think, like, I would
Yeah.
I'd say go back and we'll add a dietary question with the,
Yeah.
to your point, Leanne, of then, but explaining why we need it. Because I will say right now, as of August, we are currently not providing, we're just providing like coffee and tea for the in-person folks. We're actually going to break everybody for lunch to go out and do their own thing. So it's a little less, that's something that could come back in though. So to your point, if it's a possibility, as long as we explain, hey, we're collecting this just in case we end up adding additional snacks or lunch or food, then people probably wouldn't be confused. Because I remember I've definitely filled out a form before where they asked me something like that and then it had no application whatsoever to my experience and I was confused.
I mean, to your point, if you're not providing any food, it actually might not be necessary, right? So this actually is a good example of where industry standard, we always ask it, but if you're not providing food, then it doesn't actually make sense to ask it. And don't feel pressured to ask it just because I said you should ask it. I mean, you guys are looking at your own event, right? And I think that is actually the lesson in all of this, is looking at your own event and your own, like what you're building, and building registration to fit around that. So I think if there's anything else, if you look at it from the whole event perspective, and I know you aren't fully sure, but is there anything else that you guys would need, is a question I would be asking myself, right? Is there anything else you would need to include for badging, or are you doing any booklets? Are you doing, I just hosted my own very short afternoon event, and one thing we built in was LinkedIn profile, because then we actually created and like attendee directory, so people could see who else was coming. Only once you were registered could you see the list. And then you could just click and go connect directly with those people on LinkedIn, because we're very active on LinkedIn. And so we wanted people to be able to see each other and connect with each other if they wanted, right? So that could also be potentially a suggestion, is allowing people to do that. Also, I don't know, I think it's good to have LinkedIn profile for some weird reason. Also, especially in our industry, you can learn a lot from their profile there too.
Yeah, we definitely lean into some of Swap Card's got some built-in features that also, I guess I should caveat for listeners, it allows you, if you've ever done, you as an attendee have ever attended an event on Swap Card, it remembers all of your biographical information. So as long as you use the same email address, that will auto-populate for our event. So there is some built-in features of like, we don't need to ask some of that purely because it does remember it. But I do like your idea, if you ask it and then it would then build like an Excel, a Excel sheet, versus you having to click into everybody's profile to then click on their little LinkedIn icon kind of thing. So you're saving a couple steps.
Yeah, we wanted everybody to connect with each other, right? And so any way we can make that easier too, why not?
You've kind of mentioned that you've done some work in Cvent, but just curious, and we just showed people some Swap Card, but what registration platforms or like tech tools do you recommend for event planners these days?
Oof. I mean, that's a big question. I do a lot of work in Cvent. I also work in Swoogo and have worked closely with the crowd comms team, who are currently building out their registration platform. Actually, they have a really good app, event app. EventMobi also has a really good event app. I was really impressed by Zettel with their registration platform, which is a new to the market platform. It's very kind of Cvent-y, but better-ish in a way. So I don't know. I've done a ton of demos, to be honest, over the last couple of years. So I've seen a lot of reg platforms. I've talked to a lot of them. I haven't gotten to use all of them though, so I can't fully comment on everybody's abilities. I'm not the person to go to RFP for software.
I mean, that's super fair. We talk about that a lot in general for just events. There's so many platforms and none of them are perfect, but like they all have their thing. And yeah, absolutely. So those are some good recommendations.
I think that's a really good point, Mary, that is actually really important for everybody to keep in mind, that there is not gonna be a perfect platform out there. None of them are perfect. You're going to have to create workarounds in every single platform. There is no platform that is perfect for every single person or every single use case. And I think that sometimes people get sold into that story. So don't get sold into it. Like go into it knowing you're going to have to do some workarounds. You're going to have to do some investing. You're probably not going to, price shop, really. I think at the end of the day, it's all going to cost a lot of money. It is what it is. And what's important is that you go into it finding a solution that is best for your use case and your company and your needs. And there's a ton of work that actually, much like building registration forms themselves, should be done before you're actually even RFPing, which is a whole other podcast episode. But really, like, the TLDR is really understand your own companies, like the mix of events you have, who your stakeholders internally are, what functionality you actually need, if you're going to need, an app and registration and on-site, or if you don't ever use apps, understand that kind of stuff before you're going in for RFPs.
So good. Yeah, I think my extra add-on for that for listeners is just always when they talk about features that are coming soon, just try to see if you can get an answer of exactly when. A lot of sales pitches, I feel like they tell you things are in the works, but if in the works means it's not done for another year, it's really not applicable to your event. So that's just one, ask those questions. And I know we're coming up on time, Leanne, but I did have this when we talked in our prep call that I wanted, my hot take from you was just, what is a registration habit you'd love to see die or go away forever?
We might have to edit this, Logan. I don't, only because I'm like, did I give you an answer? I don't even remember what
you did not. I just more, I'd like your experience, like just what's something you're like a problem you're constantly having to solve that it's like, if this could just stop happening, your life would be easier.
A lot of the issues in Reg come around actually attendee management, to be honest. It's all the stuff that actually happens after I'm done with the Reg. It's all about managing your people and the questions that come back, the stuff they miss, they don't read their emails, they need to change their hotel dates. Like, it's all about attendee management is a lot of the stuff that comes back to me that I'm like, I wish I didn't have to answer this question a million times. And I think actually AI might be, I'm not even going to talk about AI, but I think that might be probably potentially the solution.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's actually a great point. Well, thank you. As we kind of alluded to earlier, you've left us with so many tips and tricks just throughout the entire episode. So thank you so much for that. If you could kind of not necessarily summarize, but if there's one thing that you feel is most important, one last key takeaway that you want our listeners to take with them and apply to their next event registration process, what would that be? And then also, just where can listeners find you? So all of that good stuff.
Okay. I'm on a real big kick right now about trying to encourage people to just be more strategic in their registration, like building and process, right? I would love for people to go back and actually put their strategy hat on and look at their registration process and not just, oh, we did this last year, it worked fine, it's okay, we'll just do it again because we just need to get something up. Like, if people took a little bit of extra time to really assess their registration and either add or delete like one question, that would be a win for me. But even just looking at your registration process a little bit more strategically and really trying to think through the whole process and kind of incorporate a lot of what we talked about here, that would be a massive win for me. I'd be very, very happy. And as noted, I'm quite active on LinkedIn. It's really the best way to find me, but you can also find me on my website. Come and contact me. You can book a 30-minute call and meet and chat. Eventually there will be the Reg Vault, which will be the community focused solely on registration. So we'll be very excited to welcome people there when we are ready to go live with that, which hopefully is soon.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Leanne. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
Yay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. And I have the bonus tip this week, which has nothing to do with registration, maybe a little bit, but more about on-site. Mine is about printing. If you're a producer or planner, you have fought with a printer on site at some point, if not every time you are on site for an event. So my pro tip to you is to make sure you figure out your on-site printing plan, ideally the day before you're on site, or maybe even 2 days before you're on site. I recently did an event where there was free printing at the hotel, which was really nice. And nobody else seemed to be taking advantage of that. And so I was able to bang out a bunch of run of shows and just documents that my team had to have printed hard copies of on site. But I found it really varies. Sometimes I have to go to FedEx. Sometimes I'm fighting with a printer on site at the venue wherever we are. But make your life easier and figure that out before your event day.
Thank you, Logan. Great bonus tip and absolutely true. So thank you for that. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can also email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. And then also join us for our 2025 Better Events Conference by visiting bettereventspod.com/conference. But not only that, you can reach out to Logan and I directly on LinkedIn. Truly, though, this is a great way for us to connect with you directly. So please reach out. Just make sure you mention in the note that you have heard of us from the podcast. And then if you would like additional content, we have our Better Events community. So you can join our private community on Substack. And thank you so much for listening to another episode. We will see you again next Wednesday.